She had never been kissed until she caught the attention of the city's most powerful millionaire. But when Penelope Parsons accidentally knocked over a stack of books onto the expensive Italian leather shoes of Damien Lawson, she had no idea she was about to turn upside down the life of Mesa's most feared man. "Oh my goodness, I'm such a walking disaster," murmured Penelope, crouching down to collect the volumes scattered across the marble floor of the Mesa Cultural Center. Her glasses slid down her nose as she tried, unsuccessfully, to organize the books that seemed to have a life of their own. The copy of To Kill a Mockingbird had opened to a random page. The Great Gatsby was face down, and Pride and Prejudice had slipped under a leather armchair. Damien Lawson stopped in the middle of the hallway, observing the scene with that impassive expression that made government officials tremble. CEO of Lawson Group, a multi-million-dollar conglomerate in the healthcare sector, he was accustomed to women who deliberately threw themselves at his feet. But this one, kneeling on the floor, seemed more concerned about the integrity of the books than about him. She wore a simple navy blue dress, comfortable flat shoes, and her chestnut hair was pulled back in a bun that was beginning to come undone with her frantic movements. "Do you work here?" he asked, his deep voice resonating in the space. There was something about the way she handled the books with reverent care that intrigued him. Penelope looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Not because of some romantic cliché, but because she genuinely had no idea who this man in the impeccable suit was, looking at her as if she were a complex puzzle. He was tall, had broad shoulders that perfectly filled his grey jacket, dark hair with some silver streaks at the temples, and eyes that seemed to see through people. There was an intensity about him that made her swallow hard. "I'm an archivist at Mesa Public Library. I'm here to catalogue some donations for tonight's literary event." She finally managed to stand up, adjusting her glasses and smoothing her dress. "You must be one of the sponsors." Damien almost smiled. Almost. When was the last time someone didn't recognize him instantly? When was the last time someone treated him like an ordinary human being without forced reverence or calculated interest? "Something like that," he replied, picking up one of the fallen books. To Kill a Mockingbird. He observed the worn cover, the pages yellowed with time. "A good reading choice." "Actually, I prefer The House on Mango Street." Penelope blushed slightly, realizing she had said something too personal to a stranger. "Harper Lee is brilliant, but sometimes you need a hopeful ending, don't you think?" And it was at that moment that Damien Lawson, the man who commanded an empire of hospitals and laboratories, who never showed emotions, who was known for his calculated coldness and for ending meetings in 5 minutes, felt something strange happen in his chest. A weird sensation, as if something that had been sleeping for a long time was beginning to awaken. Maybe it was the way she talked about books with her eyes shining behind her glasses. Maybe it was the disconcerting sincerity in her voice. Or maybe it was the fact that she was there, in front of him, without fear, without pretensions, without apparent interest in impressing him or getting something from him. "Are you going to the event tonight?" he asked, surprising himself. He rarely asked personal questions to strangers. Penelope made an expressive grimace. "I have to go. My boss said it's mandatory to strengthen institutional ties." She made air quotes with gentle irony. "But between you and me, I'd rather stay home with my books, chamomile tea, and maybe an episode of some old series." Damien watched as she arranged the last stack of books with careful, efficient movements. There was something magnetic about this woman who hid behind glasses and neutral clothes, who talked about books the way others talked about loved ones. Something that intrigued him deeply and that he couldn't name. "Then I'll see you there," he said, handing her the last book. Penelope nodded, not knowing she had just accepted an unspoken invitation from the city's most powerful man, not knowing that her peaceful life, made of predictable routines and small pleasures, was about to transform into an emotional roller coaster she never imagined being capable of feeling. That night, The main hall of the cultural center was decorated with discreet elegance, white and green flower arrangements, soft lighting that highlighted the artwork on the walls, and round tables with linen tablecloths where guests gathered in select groups. Penelope was leaning against a wall near the bookshelf of Mesa authors, observing the elegant crowd with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. She wore a simple black dress that her mother had insisted she buy for special occasions. Her hair pulled back in a low bun she had done herself, trying to go unnoticed among socialites and businessmen. It worked for exactly 15 minutes. "You came," a familiar voice said behind her. Penelope turned around and almost choked on the horchata water she was drinking. The man from the morning was there, but now she could see him clearly under the golden light of the hall. Tall, broad shoulders that seemed to have been sculpted, dark hair perfectly combed, eyes that seemed to see through people's souls, and everyone around him greeted him with a reverence that bordered on respectful fear. Important people approached him, whispered things in his ear, laughed at comments he made with an educated but distant smile. "Oh my God," she murmured, finally making the connection. "You're Damien Lawson," he completed, and there was something amused in his eyes as he saw the expression of shock on her face. "And you're Penelope Parsons, the archivist who prefers hopeful endings and chamomile tea." "You remembered everything," she said, still processing that she had knocked books over the most famous multimillionaire in Mesa, the man whose decisions influenced the lives of thousands of people. "I have an excellent memory for important details," Damien replied, and there was something in the way he said "important" that made her heart race. Before Penelope could respond, an elegant blonde woman approached, wrapping Damien's arm with territorial ownership. Victoria Sterling, his ex-fiancée, had returned to the city just that night, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Penelope's annual salary. "Darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your new friend?" asked Victoria, examining Penelope from head to toe with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And it was then that Penelope realized she was entering a game much bigger and more dangerous than she imagined. A game where she was just a piece on the board, without knowing the rules, without understanding the other players' motivations. But looking into Damien's eyes, seeing how he had subtly moved away from Victoria, she wondered, was she really just a piece? Or maybe, for the first time in her life, someone saw her as the main player. Damien observed the tension settling between the two women and felt a familiar irritation rising in his chest, only this time directed towards someone completely different. During all the years he had been with Victoria, he had gotten used to her territorial displays, to the way she marked presence and established social hierarchies. But now, seeing her examine Penelope as if she were an object of dubious quality, something in him rebelled against the manipulation. "Victoria, this is Penelope Parsons," he said, deliberately not using any affectionate terms to refer to his ex-fiancée, maintaining a formal tone that any attentive person could perceive. "Penelope, Victoria Sterling." Penelope felt the discomfort of the situation like a heavy cloud, but there was something in Damien's posture that reassured her. He had subtly moved away from Victoria, creating a physical space that spoke volumes about the emotional state of their relationship. His shoulders were tense. His expression had returned to that cold, controlled mask she had seen during the day. "Nice to meet you," murmured Penelope, extending her hand with the politeness her mother had taught her since childhood. Victoria examined her from head to toe with the expertise of someone accustomed to evaluating female competition, noting every detail: the simple but well-cut dress, the comfortable shoes instead of high heels, the absence of expensive jewelry, the discreet makeup. "Where do you work, dear?" "I'm an archivist at Mesa Public Library," Penelope replied, raising her chin slightly. There was something in Victoria's condescending tone that awakened a strength she didn't know she possessed, a quiet dignity that came from years of helping people find information, of preserving knowledge, of doing work that truly mattered. "How interesting," Victoria smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came with subtle venom, calculated to hurt without seeming openly hostile. It must be comforting to work with old and forgotten things. The insinuation was clear, and Penelope felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, Damien stepped forward, his voice gaining a dangerous tone that made several nearby people look discreetly in their direction. Penelope preserves knowledge and culture for future generations. It's a much nobler job than many professions out there, he said, and there was a coldness in his eyes that Victoria knew well enough to know she had stepped on dangerous ground. The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by the arrival of Marcus Rivera, Damien's best friend. Tall, with slightly disheveled brown hair and a genuine smile that contrasted with the tension in the air, he seemed to have a natural ability to diffuse complicated situations. "Damien, you need to see the report that came in about the new rehabilitation center in Scottsdale," he said, but his eyes fixed on Penelope with respectful curiosity. "Sorry to interrupt. Marcus Rivera," he introduced himself, extending his hand to Penelope. "Penelope Parsons, the pleasure is mine." "Actually, the timing was perfect," murmured Penelope, looking around and realizing that the conversation had attracted some curious glances. "I need to go to the restroom, freshen up a bit." She walked away with measured steps, leaving the three watching her exit. Marcus looked at Damien with a raised eyebrow and a smile that had known his friend for too many years to be fooled. "Interesting," he commented quietly. "First time I've seen someone walk away when you're present. Usually people crowd around." "She doesn't know who I am," said Damien, and there was something almost admiring in his voice, as if he were discovering a rare and fascinating phenomenon. "She knew," corrected Victoria venomously, adjusting her blonde hair with a studied gesture. "Everyone in Mesa knows who you are, Damien. She's just pretending to get your attention. It's an obvious strategy." Damien looked at her with a coldness that made Victoria take a step back. During all the years they had been together, she had gotten used to his impatience and severity in business, but she had rarely been the direct target of that intensity. "You're wrong, Victoria, and I suggest you treat Penelope with the respect she deserves." "Since when do you care so much about librarians?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but there was a note of panic in her voice. "Since I met one who made me remember why I started reading in the first place," Damien replied, surprising even Marcus with the honesty of the response. In the ladies' room, elegantly decorated with ornate mirrors and fresh flowers, Penelope looked at herself in the mirror, trying to process what had happened. Her life had been 29 years of comforting predictability, work at the library, caring for her mother, nighttime reading, Sunday teas. And in less than 24 hours, she had met the city's most powerful man and been evaluated by his ex-fiancée as if she were a fish in the market. "Are you okay?" asked Sarah, her work colleague, entering the bathroom with curious, bright eyes. "I saw you talking to Damien Lawson and walking away from Victoria Sterling." "My God, Penelope, you've gotten yourself into a soap opera." "I knocked books onto his shoes this morning," Penelope replied, nervously washing her hands and trying to reorganize the bun that had come loose. "And he didn't call security to throw you out?" Sarah laughed, incredulous. "Girl, you don't understand the dimension of this. Damien Lawson doesn't talk to just anyone. He's known for being inaccessible. People line up to get 5 minutes with him." Penelope sighed, drying her hands with mechanical movements. "Maybe it's better if I leave before the situation gets more complicated." "Don't even think about it!" Sarah grabbed her arm firmly. "You're going back out there, and you're going to find out what that man wants. And if he's really interested in you, you need to stop sabotaging yourself." "I don't sabotage myself. Penelope, dear, you're beautiful, intelligent, kind, and have a heart the size of the world. But you hide as if you were defective," said Sarah, with the frankness of someone who had been a friend for years. "Maybe it's time to let someone truly see you." When Penelope returned to the hall, Damien was alone near the window overlooking downtown Mesa, observing the city lights reflected on the pavement, wet with the night drizzle. Victoria had disappeared, probably to give interviews or pose for photos with other illustrious guests. Your ex-fiancé seems intense, commented Penelope, approaching slowly. Damien turned toward her, and for the first time that evening his face softened completely. Victoria is the past, a past that insists on making itself present when it least should. He paused. And you? Are you going to tell me why you practically ran away? I didn't run away, protested Penelope, but her smile betrayed the defensive tone. I went to the bathroom. It's different. Really? Damien smiled, and Penelope felt something strange and warm happen in her stomach. It was a different smile from those polite ones he distributed to other guests. This one was real, reached his eyes, completely transformed his face, because it seemed like you were fleeing from an uncomfortable situation. Maybe I was, she admitted, playing with the strap of her simple purse. I'm not used to attending events like this. I prefer the company of books to, well, this. She gestured vaguely toward the hall, where groups formed and dissolved in a complex social dance she had never learned to execute. And why books? Asked Damien, genuinely curious. It was rare to find someone who deliberately chose solitude over socialization. Penelope looked at him, surprised by the genuine question. Most people considered her preference for books as a flaw to be corrected, not as a conscious choice to be understood. Because they don't judge. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, how much money you have in the bank. A good story is a good story, period, and they're always there when you need them. Damien remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words as if they were a revolutionary concept. Have you ever thought that maybe people are more like books than you imagine? How so? Some have flashy covers, full of glitter and promises, but they're empty inside, he said, glancing briefly in the direction where Victoria had disappeared. Others have simple covers without pretensions, but hide extraordinary complex stories that change your life if you give them a chance. Penelope blushed, clearly perceiving the insinuation. You're being too kind to me. I'm being honest, Damien corrected, taking a step closer. Can I take you home tonight? The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're Damien Lawson, CEO of an empire, and I'm just Penelope Parsons, who works at a public library, she said, the words coming out in a nervous torrent. Because we live in completely different worlds. Because people will talk. Because... She stopped, realizing she was revealing more insecurities than she intended. Because what, Penelope? She looked at him, seeing something in his eyes that made her momentarily forget all the reasons why she should say no. There was an intensity there, but also a vulnerability she didn't expect to find. Because I'm afraid this is just a game for you, a whim. And I don't know how to play those games. Damien's honest response was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant man about 60 years old who approached with a warm smile and contagious energy. Damien, my boy. Robert Lawson hugged his son with genuine affection. Aren't you going to introduce me to your companion? Dad, this is Penelope Parsons, said Damien, and there was something protective in his voice. Penelope, my father, Robert Lawson. Pleasure to meet you, dear, said Robert, kissing Penelope's hand with old-fashioned gallantry. I hope my son is behaving like the gentleman I tried to raise. He's been very kind, Mr. Lawson, Penelope replied, smiling genuinely. There was something about the older man's warm energy that calmed her. Excellent. You know, Penelope, Damien needs someone to teach him to be more human, said Robert, completely ignoring his son's warning look. He lives buried in work, forgets there's life beyond hospitals and financial reports. Dad, warned Damien, but there was affection in his voice. What? It's true, Robert laughed. Penelope, do you like chess? I have some friends over there who would love to meet you. Interesting people who know how to talk about things beyond money. And so Penelope found herself being guided to a table where a group of elegant gentlemen played chess, discussing literature, politics, and philosophy with the passion of people who had lived long enough to know what really mattered. Damien watched, completely fascinated, as she naturally adapted to this environment that should intimidate her, how she asked intelligent questions and laughed sincerely at the stories his father's friends told. But then, from across the hall, Victoria observed everything with calculating eyes, already planning her next move. And at a discreet table in the corner, a middle-aged man made notes in a small notebook, discreetly photographing with his phone. Gregory Nash had decided it was time to investigate more deeply who Penelope Parsons was and why she had caught Damien Lowson's attention. 3 weeks after that encounter that had changed the course of her life, Penelope had developed an unexpected routine that mixed anxiety and anticipation in equal doses. Every day around 5 in the afternoon, when the library began to empty and the golden light of late afternoon entered through the tall windows, Damien Lowson appeared. He didn't announce his arrival, didn't make a show of it, didn't come with bodyguards or assistants. He simply appeared, chose a book from the shelves with deliberate care, and sat at one of the wooden tables near the counter where she worked. "Hez here again," murmured Sarah, nudging Penelope while organizing catalogue cards. "I swear by all that's sacred that if this isn't romantic interest, I don't understand anything about men anymore." Penelope looked up from the book she was registering, and there he was, leafing through a yellowed copy of 100 Years of Solitude. He wore reading glasses that made him seem less intimidating and more accessible, more human. The suit had been replaced by a light blue shirt and casual dark pants. He seemed to have left the weight of the business world outside the library. "He just likes to read," whispered Penelope, but her heart raced as it always did when she saw him. It was a silent ritual that had been established between them. He would arrive, choose a book, sit down, read. She would pretend to be focused on work, but became hyper-aware of his every movement. "Penelope, dear, in 3 weeks he's read more books than most people read in a year," said Sarah, pragmatically, discreetly pointing to a pile of books that Damien had returned in recent days. "Either he's writing a secret thesis on universal literature, or he's completely in love and uses books as a pretext to be near you." "Sarah, enough," murmured Penelope, but her cheeks blushed. "Besides," continued Sarah, relentless, "look at the books he chooses. Love in the Time of Cholera, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice. The man is on a classic romance marathon. This is no coincidence." At that moment, as if he had heard the conversation, Damien looked up and met Penelope's gaze. He smiled, and she felt that same chill in her stomach she had been experiencing lately, a new and disconcerting sensation that made her question everything she thought she knew about herself. "I'm going to talk to him," Penelope decided, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. "That's the spirit," Sarah pushed her gently. "Go, Tigress, and remember, be yourself. That's what seems to appeal to him." Penelope approached the table, holding a book she had just catalogued, trying to seem casual. "Garcia Marquez, I didn't imagine you liked magical realism." "I'm discovering that I like many things I didn't imagine before," Damien replied, taking off his glasses and looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble slightly. "Please sit down." She hesitated, looking around the almost empty library, but finally sat in the chair next to him. The scent of his masculine cologne, mixed with the aroma of old paper and wood from the library, created a strangely comforting combination. "Can I ask why you really come here every day?" she asked, nervously playing with the pen in her hand. "Do you want the diplomatic answer or the honest one?" "The honest one. Always the honest one. Because it's the only place where I can see you without causing a media circus," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Because here you're just Penelope, and I'm just a man who likes to read." The brutal simplicity of the answer left her speechless. Penelope looked at her hands, trying to process what he had said and what that meant for her carefully organized life. "Damien, have dinner with me tonight," he said, gently interrupting. "Please, not at an elegant restaurant, not at a social party. Just the two of us talking. You choose the place." "I can't," she replied automatically. "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to do this." she admitted, finally looking at him with total honesty. I don't know how to be with someone like you. I don't know the rules of this game. Someone like me. Rich, powerful, handsome. She blushed deeply. You could have any woman in Mesa. Sophisticated women, well-dressed women, who know how to behave at business dinners and social events. But I don't want any woman in Mesa, said Damien, his voice gaining an intensity that made her tremble. I want you. The woman who treats books like treasures, who blushes when she talks about what she likes, who doesn't pretend to be someone she's not to impress me. Before Penelope could respond, Damien's phone rang insistently. He answered, clearly irritated by the interruption. What happened, Marcus? His expression hardened progressively as he listened. When did that happen? Long pause. How many injured? Another pause. He'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up and looked at Penelope with an expression she couldn't completely decipher, a mix of professional concern and personal reluctance. I have to go. There was an accident at one of our construction sites, and some workers were injured. I need to be there, he said, getting up quickly. But Penelope, before I leave, I need to tell you something important. What? Victoria has definitely returned to the city, and she's investigating you. Asking questions, trying to discover details about your life, your family, your past. Investigating? Penelope stood up abruptly, feeling a chill in her stomach. Why would she do that? Because she knows me too well. She knows you're different from all the other women who have passed through my life, said Damien, gently touching her arm. And because she hates losing anything she considers her property. But you two broke up. For Victoria, that's irrelevant. She always comes back when she thinks I've found someone important, he explained, with bitterness in his voice. It's a behavior pattern I know well. Damien, I don't want to be the cause of problems. You're not the problem, Penelope. You'll never be the problem, he said firmly. Promise me you'll be careful. Don't walk alone at night. Don't give personal information to strangers. And if anyone approaches you asking questions about me, call me immediately. Penelope nodded, but when Damien left the library with hurried steps, she felt as if a dark and threatening cloud had settled over her previously tranquil life. That night at home, Penelope was helping her mother, Dorothy, prepare dinner when the doorbell rang insistently. The colonial house where they lived had walls that echoed any sound, and the doorbell's ring reverberated through the rooms almost aggressively. Who could it be at this hour? Murmured Dorothy, drying her hands on the floral apron she wore for cooking. It's almost 8 at night. Penelope went to answer, with Luna barking nervously behind her, and found an elegant, middle-aged man smiling at the door. He wore an expensive suit, had grey hair combed with gel, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something about him that made her instinctively take a step back. Penelope Parsons? He asked, consulting a business card. I'm Gregory Nash, from Nash Consulting. I'd like to talk with you about a matter of mutual interest. The name wasn't completely strange. Penelope vaguely remembered having done some internship at his company years ago, but had left quickly for reasons she preferred to keep buried in memory. The memory brought a bitter taste to her mouth. What a surprise, Mr. Nash, she said, not inviting him in and keeping the door half open. How can I help you after all this time? I heard you're close to Damien Lawson, he said, his smile becoming less friendly and more predatory. And that brought back some interesting memories about our time working together. Penelope felt her blood freeze in her veins. That was a long time ago, Mr. Nash, and we have nothing to discuss about that period. It was a long time ago, he agreed, leaning slightly forward. But it would be a shame if certain information, certain versions of events reached the wrong ears. Don't you think? Especially considering you're getting close to such an influential and respected man as Damien Lawson. What exactly do you want? Asked Penelope, trying to keep her voice steady despite the trembling she felt inside. Simple information, said Gregory, taking a cigarette from his pocket and lighting it, blowing smoke in her direction. About Damien's personal plans, about the company, about when he's home, when he travels, who he meets with. Things a girlfriend would naturally know. First, I'm not his girlfriend. Second, you're completely crazy if you think I would do that. Penelope replied, trying to close the door. Gregory put his foot in the threshold, preventing her from closing it. Think carefully, Penelope. Your reputation, your mother's reputation, your position at the library. It would be a shame if all that were tarnished by a misunderstanding from the past. You know how these things can be distorted, especially when they involve workplace harassment. It wasn't a misunderstanding, she said, with more strength than she expected from herself. And you know it. Ah, but who's going to believe an archivist without resources against a successful businessman? Gregory smiled cruelly. Especially if I have to tell my version of events. Where you were an ambitious intern who tried to seduce the boss to get a permanent job. Penelope slammed the door in his face, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Dorothy appeared at the kitchen doorway, worried, Luna still barking nervously. Who was it, honey? You look pale. Nobody important, Mom, Penelope lied, trying to smile. Shall we have dinner? But as she set the table with mechanical movements, Penelope knew her life had just become much more complicated. And the worst part was that she couldn't tell Damien the complete truth without explaining what had really happened during that internship years ago. Something she had buried in the depths of her mind and sworn never to remember. His hands on her, the insinuations disguised as professional guidance, the veiled threats when she rejected him. Her phone rang, making her jump. A message from Damien. Is everything okay? I managed to resolve the situation at the site, but I can't stop thinking about you. I need to see you. Penelope looked at the message for a long time, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, seek the protection he had offered. But another part, the part that had learned to protect herself for years, feared that involving him would only make everything worse. Finally, she wrote, I'm fine. See you tomorrow. But she wasn't fine. And now she had to decide whether to tell Damien the truth or try to solve alone a situation that was clearly beyond her control. A situation that threatened not only her peace of mind, but also her mother's reputation and the job she loved. That night, Penelope could barely sleep, listening to every noise from the street, every car that passed, imagining if Gregory Nash was out there, planning his next move. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if meeting Damien Lawson had been a blessing or a curse. Penelope didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the kitchen until the early morning hours, drinking chamomile tea and petting Luna, who seemed to sense her anxiety and refused to leave her side. The golden retriever kept her head resting on Penelope's legs, as if she could offer some comfort against the ghosts of the past that Gregory Nash had resurrected. At 6 in the morning, when the sun began to rise over the rooftops of Mesa, painting the sky in pink and golden tones, she made a difficult but necessary decision. She would tell Damien everything. She arrived at the library earlier than usual, an hour before official hours began, and spent the entire morning distracted. She organized the same books 3 times, confused catalog numbers, and spilled coffee on the work table twice. When Sarah arrived and saw her state, she immediately realized something was wrong. Penelope, you look like a ghost, Sarah observed, putting her bag in the locker. Did something happen? I'll tell you later, murmured Penelope, looking at the clock. There were 6 hours left until Damien appeared, and each minute seemed to drag like an eternity. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, and Damien appeared at the library door as he always did, Penelope was so nervous she almost knocked over a pile of books again. He immediately noticed something was different. You look tired, Damien observed, approaching the counter with evident concern on his face. I need to talk to you, said Penelope, looking around the library where there were still some users. But not here. It's private. Should we go to my house? He suggested. No. Penelope hesitated, imagining his mansion, probably full of employees and bodyguards. Should we go to the cafe on the corner? The Colonial. 20 minutes later, they were sitting at a discreet table in Café Colonial, a cozy establishment with exposed brick walls and plants hanging from the ceiling. Damien waited patiently while Penelope stirred the sugar in her coffee with nervous movements, clearly gathering courage to speak. "Last night a man appeared at my house," she began, unable to look at him directly. "Gregory Nash. You said he's your business rival." Damien's face hardened instantly, as if an ice mask had descended over his features. "What did he want?" "Information about you, about your company, your habits, your plans," said Penelope, finally lifting her eyes to meet his. "He blackmailed me." "How, exactly?" Damien's voice was dangerously low, controlled, but there was a cold fury behind it that made Penelope tremble. Penelope took a deep breath, preparing to tell something she had kept to herself for years. "A few years ago, I did an internship at his company. I was 22, in my last semester of library science, and I got that internship through a university program." She paused, nervously moving the small spoon. "From the first day, he started making comments about my appearance, invitations to working dinners, touching my shoulder or hand longer than necessary." Damien clenched his fists on the table, but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I tried to ignore it, thinking I was imagining things, that maybe it was just his way of being kind. But one Friday night he asked me to stay after hours to review some reports. When everyone left, he tried to kiss me. He forced the situation." Penelope's voice failed slightly. "When I pushed him away and said no, he got furious. He said I was misinterpreting his intentions, that I was just a dramatic intern who was seeing harassment where there wasn't any." "Penelope!" Damien extended his hand across the table, covering hers gently. "I left the company the next day. I made up an excuse about family problems, and never talked about it again," she continued, feeling tears threatening to fall. "Until last night. Now he's saying he's going to spread lies about me, distort what happened, make it seem like I tried to seduce him to get a job. He wants information about you in exchange for his silence." "You're not going to give him anything," said Damien, his voice firm as granite. "And he's not going to bother you anymore, I guarantee that." "You don't understand, Damien. He can destroy my reputation, my mother's, make me lose my job at the library." Penelope tried to pull her hand away, but he held it gently. "No, Penelope, you're the one who doesn't understand," said Damien, leaning forward, his voice intense but controlled. "Nobody touches you. Nobody threatens you. Nobody hurts you. Not while I'm alive to prevent it." The intensity in his voice and eyes made her tremble, but in a completely different way from the fear she felt toward Gregory. "Damien, you don't need to protect me. I'm not your responsibility. I need to do it, yes, and it's not because you're my responsibility," he said, touching her face with a delicacy that contrasted with the fury in his eyes. "It's because I—" "Damien! What a wonderful surprise to find you here." Both turned abruptly. Victoria was approaching the table, accompanied by a professional cameraman and a reporter with a microphone. Penelope immediately recognized the situation. A carefully planned ambush, probably with information provided by someone who had seen them enter the cafe. "Victoria," said Damien, standing up quickly, instinctively placing himself between her and Penelope. "What are you doing?" "A special report on the new relationships of Mesa's most influential businessmen," she replied, smiling venomously for the camera before looking at Penelope. "And imagine my surprise to discover you're dating a public library archivist." "Turn off that camera, now!" Damien ordered, his voice loaded with a threat that made several people in the cafe turn to watch. "Come on, darling. Don't be shy. The public has a right to know about Mesa's most coveted millionaire's new passion," said Victoria, turning to Penelope with a cruel smile. "Tell us, Penelope, what's it like dating a multimillionaire? It must be very different from what you're used to, considering you still live with your mother in a simple little house downtown." Penelope stood up slowly, and something fundamental changed in her posture. The shyness and insecurity gave way to a fierce dignity that surprised even Damien. Years of small humiliations, of being seen as just a librarian, of having her intelligence and worth questioned, culminated in that moment. "You're absolutely right, Victoria," she said, looking directly at the camera with impressive calm. "It is very different from what I'm used to. I'm used to honesty, to people who treat me with genuine respect, to relationships based on real affection, not financial interest or social status." "How brave," said Victoria, but there was nervousness in her voice at the unexpected response. "It must be difficult competing with women who really belong to his world, who understand the expectations and responsibilities that come with this type of relationship." "You're completely wrong," interrupted Damien, positioning himself beside Penelope and taking her hand. "There's no competition because there's no possible comparison." He looked directly at the camera, his voice clear and firm. "Penelope Parsons is the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. She taught me that real wealth isn't measured in money, but in character, in kindness, in authenticity. And she's the richest person I know in all those aspects." The silence that followed was broken by Penelope's voice, addressing Victoria directly with a serenity that impressed everyone in the cafe. "You must be a very unhappy and insecure person to need to humiliate other people on national television. I sincerely hope you find the peace and happiness you clearly don't have, because nobody deserves to live with so much poison in their heart." She took her purse and headed for the exit with firm steps. Damien followed her immediately, leaving Victoria and the TV crew behind, clearly disconcerted by the direction the interview had taken. On the street, Penelope was walking quickly, but Damien caught up with her and gently touched her arm. "Penelope, wait, please." "I can't do this, Damien," she said, turning toward him with tears in her eyes, but also with a determination he had never seen before. "I can't live like this, being hunted by vengeful ex-fiancés, blackmailed by men like Gregory Nash, being exposed in the media. I wasn't born for this life. I don't know how to navigate this world." "Then let's create our own life," said Damien, taking her hands firmly. "Away from all this madness, away from these toxic people. Just the two of us, building something real and genuine." "How?" she asked, wanting to believe, but still afraid. "Trust me," he said, drawing her closer, seeing vulnerability and strength mixed in her eyes. "Just trust me. We're going to solve this together." Penelope looked at him for a long moment, seeing absolute sincerity in his eyes, seeing real love for the first time in her life. Slowly she nodded. "But first, we need to solve the Gregory Nash problem," she said, with more firmness in her voice. "Leave that to me," said Damien, smiling in a way she had never seen before. It was a smile that promised protection, justice, and retribution for whoever had dared to threaten her. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to remind him that messing with the woman I love was the biggest mistake of his life." And for the first time since Gregory Nash had appeared at her door, Penelope didn't feel scared or vulnerable. She felt protected, loved, and most importantly, she felt like part of a team that could face any challenge together. The next morning brought a surprise that nobody in Mesa expected. Penelope woke up to the insistent sound of her phone ringing at 7 in the morning, an hour when normally only her mother would be awake to prepare coffee. It was Sarah, clearly in a state of panic and excitement. "Penelope, did you see the news? You need to turn on the TV right now," Sarah shouted from the other end of the line. "What?" Penelope sat up in bed, still sleepy and confused. "Sarah, what time is it?" "Forget the time. You're in all the newspapers, on all social media, on all TV channels. Yesterday's interview went viral." Penelope ran to the living room, where her mother was already watching television with an expression of mixed pride and concern. On the screen, a montage of yesterday's confrontation was playing, but what completely surprised Penelope was the massively positive public reaction. Social media was exploding with comments supporting her stance, her dignity, her elegant and firm response to Victoria's provocations. "My dear daughter," said Dorothy with tears of pride in her eyes, "I'm so proud of you. You defended yourself like a true lady, with class and intelligence." On television, a social commentator was analyzing the video. "What we see here is a perfect example of how to respond to social bullying with dignity. Penelope Parsons didn't stoop to the level of provocations, but defended her values in an articulate and respectful way. The phone rang again. It was an unknown number. "Penelope, this is Marcus Rivera, Damien's friend," said a male voice on the other end. "He asked me to call you because he's in an urgent meeting, but he has an important message for you. Can you meet him at the library today at 2 o'clock? He has a surprise and some news about Gregory Nash." "News about Gregory?" asked Penelope, her heart racing. "Good news," Marcus assured with a tone of satisfaction in his voice. "Very good news." Penelope arrived at the library at the agreed time, anxious and curious, and found a scene she would never have imagined witnessing. Damien was there, but he wasn't alone. There were several people with him. His father, Robert, who was smiling broadly, his brother, Alexander, whom she hadn't met personally yet, Marcus, and to her complete surprise, several local authorities, including the regional delegate and a prosecutor she recognized from the news. "What's happening?" she asked, confused and slightly intimidated by the official presence. "Gregory Nash was arrested this morning," said Damien, approaching her with a smile of satisfaction she had never seen before, "for blackmail, sexual harassment, extortion, and a series of other charges. We discovered that you weren't even close to being the first person he tried to intimidate or harass. How did you manage to—" Penelope couldn't finish the question. "Let's say that when someone messes with the woman I love, I mobilize all the resources at my disposal," said Damien, his voice mixed with controlled fury and tenderness. "I hired private investigators, specialized lawyers, and we discovered that Gregory Nash had a behavior pattern that lasted years." Marcus approached, carrying a folder full of documents. "We found at least 8 women willing to testify against him. Cases similar to yours, Penelope. Interns, junior employees, women in vulnerable positions he tried to intimidate and blackmail. He's not going to bother you or anyone else anymore?" added the prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with a determined expression. "The evidence is solid, and he'll probably spend several years in prison." Penelope felt a wave of relief so intense it almost knocked her down. Years of silent fear, unspoken guilt, unjustified shame began to dissipate like fog under the morning sun. "But there's more," said Damien, seeming slightly nervous, which was completely out of character for him. "Penelope, yesterday, when you confronted Victoria that way, when you showed your strength and dignity in front of the entire country, I realized something fundamental." "What?" she asked, noticing that everyone present was watching them with hopeful smiles. "That you don't need to change to fit into my world," he said, taking her hands gently. "I'm the one who needs to change to deserve to be part of your world. You taught me that true love isn't about power or control or impressing other people. It's about vulnerability, about honesty, about choosing someone every day not for what they have, but for who they are." "Damien," whispered Penelope, feeling tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You taught me that being human is more important than being powerful, that kindness is worth more than wealth, that a genuine smile is more precious than all the jewels in the world," he continued, his voice becoming more emotional. "You taught me not to hide behind titles and money." "You were already human," said Penelope, her voice soft but firm. "You were just lost, hidden behind all those protections that the business world forces you to build. Then teach me to live without those protections. Teach me to be just Damien, not the CEO, not the multi-millionaire, just the man who loves you," he asked. And it was then that Penelope realized they weren't just the two of them there. There were library employees watching discreetly, some users who had stopped to see what was happening, Sarah with tears in her eyes, filming everything with her phone, and even people who had passed by the street and stopped to watch through the large glass windows. "Penelope Parsons," said Damien, his voice clear and firm, resonating through the silent library. "Will you accept having dinner with me tonight, officially, publicly, without hiding, without fear of what others will think?" She laughed, a light and genuine laugh that resonated through the library like music. "I thought you'd never officially ask. Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she replied, feeling as if she were finally coming home after a long journey. And then, in front of all those unexpected witnesses, Damien Lawson, the man who never showed emotions in public, who was known for his coldness and absolute control, drew Penelope into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't the hesitant kiss of a first time, or the careful kiss of someone afraid to hurt. It was the kiss of someone who had finally found their place in the world, their emotional home, their person. Penelope, the woman who had never been kissed, discovered it was completely worth waiting for that moment, for that man, for that love that made her feel as if she could conquer anything. When they separated, sincere applause resonated through the library. Penelope laughed, hiding her slightly blushed face in Damien's chest, who hugged her tighter as if he would never let her go again. "I think our love story is going to become legend in Mesa," he murmured in her ear, breathing in her delicate perfume. "Good," she replied, lifting her face to look at him with unconditional love. "I always liked happy endings, remember?" But then, from the back of the library, Sarah's unmistakable voice was heard shouting, "Finally!" I was losing hope of seeing this girl kiss someone, and everyone laughed, because sometimes true love comes with an audience, with drama, with complications and external interference. But when it's real, when it's right, when two people genuinely choose each other, none of that really matters. 6 months later, Penelope would discover that Damien had discreetly bought all the land around the library to transform the entire area into a modern cultural complex. Not to impress her or as a grand romantic gesture, but because he had learned from her that knowledge and culture were patrimonies that deserved to be preserved, celebrated, and made accessible to the entire community. And Damien would discover that being with Penelope didn't mean giving up his professional world or diminishing his ambitions, but expanding his perspective in ways he had never imagined possible, becoming a more human, more ethical businessman, more connected to the real impact of his decisions. But those were stories for other chapters of their intertwined lives. For now, there in that library where everything had begun with books falling to the floor, they had everything they really needed: true and unconditional love, an audience that genuinely supported them, and the absolute certainty that some stories really do have happy endings that are worth every tear, every fear, every moment of uncertainty that preceded them. Epilogue. 2 years later, Mesa Public Library had never received as many visitors as in the last 2 years. And it wasn't just because of the impressive cultural complex that had been built around the original historic building. Although the suspended gardens designed by renowned architects, the literary cafe that served the best local treats, the independent bookstore that supported local authors, and the cinema room that exhibited classics and national productions were truly magnificent. It was because the love story between the shy archivist and the powerful millionaire had become not only legend in the city, but a symbol that true love still existed and could overcome any social barrier. Penelope adjusted her glasses. She had kept the glasses despite Damien's suggestions to experiment with contact lenses, and he had learned to love even more the way she pushed them up her nose when she was concentrated, and smiled seeing Damien entering through the library's main door. Even after all that time living together, even after 1,000 mornings waking up beside him, her heart still raced slightly when she saw him. He no longer had that cold, impassive expression that had intimidated her at their first meeting. In the last 2 years, he had learned to smile more frequently, to laugh sincerely, to show affection publicly, to live with lightness. "How was the meeting with the investors for the new pediatric hospital?" she asked, approaching to greet him with a soft kiss. "They approved the project completely," Damien replied, surrounding her with his arms for a moment. "It's going to be the most modern and humanized pediatric hospital in the center of the country. Play areas on every floor, children's library, space for companions, everything designed to make the experience less traumatic for kids." "I'm so proud of you," said Penelope. and he was still surprised daily by the genuine sincerity in her voice, by the way she celebrated each of his victories as if they were hers too. "And I have a special surprise for you today," said Damien, taking a small antique box from his jacket's inner pocket. Penelope opened her eyes wide, her heart racing. "Damien, it's not what you're thinking," he laughed, carefully opening the box. Inside was an antique and ornate key, clearly handmade, with details in aged silver. "It's the key to my paternal grandmother's private library. It's been closed for 15 years since she died, but I thought you'd like to bring those books back to life. There are more than 5,000 volumes, many first editions, some rare manuscripts. She would love to know that someone who loves books as much as she did is taking care of her treasure." Penelope took the key with slightly trembling hands, feeling the weight of history and trust that Damien was placing in her. "You'd give me access to the Lawson family's personal library, to your family's books." "Penelope, I'd give you access to my soul, if you asked me," said Damien, touching her face with infinite tenderness. "A library is very little compared to what you mean to me." "I love you," she said, throwing herself into his arms with the naturalness of someone who had found their home. "I love you too. More each day," he replied, hugging her tight. "My favorite librarian, my best friend, my life partner." From across the library, Sarah watched the scene with a satisfied smile, discreetly wiping away a tear. "Yes, Dorothy was completely right from the beginning," she murmured to herself. Penelope really deserved more than the world seemed willing to offer her, and she finally got it. That afternoon, when the library closed its doors to the public, Damien and Penelope walked hand in hand through Messa's historic streets. They no longer needed to hide from cameras or avoid public places, no longer needed to fear media ambushes or blackmail. Victoria had definitively moved to Phoenix after the public failure of her attempt to humiliate Penelope, and was rarely seen or mentioned in the city. Gregory Nash was serving an 8-year sentence in prison, and his case had served as precedent for other women to report similar situations, and they had built something solid, real, lasting, that resisted all external storms. "Do you know what impresses me most when I think about our story?" said Penelope, stopping in front of Heritage Square, observing the soft movement of the fountains that reflected the golden light of sunset. "What, love?" "That our story began with books falling to the floor by pure chance and transformed into all this," she said, gesturing to encompass not only their moment together, but the entire life they had built together. "Maybe the books didn't fall by accident," said Damien philosophically, drawing her closer. "Maybe they knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe the universe conspired for us to meet." Penelope laughed, that musical laugh he had learned to love more than any symphony. "You're becoming too romantic, Mr. Lawson. Be careful not to lose your reputation as a serious businessman." "Exclusively your fault, Miss Parsons," he said, spinning her in his arms as if they were dancing to music only they could hear. "You completely infected me with your happy endings and your unshakable belief in true love. And do you complain about that?" "Never in my life," Damien replied, kissing her again as the sun set over Mesa, painting the sky in golden and pink colors that seemed to have been chosen especially for that moment. And there, in that perfect instant, with the hypnotic sound of the square's fountains and the aroma of desert wildflowers in the Arizona air, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she had found not only the love of her life, but also the bravest, most authentic and happiest version of herself, a version she didn't even know existed until Damien appeared in her life and showed her she was worthy of being loved exactly as she was. Because sometimes the greatest gift someone can give us isn't material wealth or social status, but the courage and security to be who we really are, without masks, without pretensions, without fear of judgment. And Damien had given her that, just as she had given him the ability to love without fear, to be vulnerable, to find joy in life's simple things. Some years later, when young couples would ask about the secret to such a solid and lasting relationship, Penelope would always answer the same thing. We don't complete each other as if we were two broken halves. We choose each other as two complete people who decide to share their lives. Every day, we wake up and choose to be together, choose to support each other unconditionally, choose to grow side by side while respecting who the other is. And Damien would always add with a smile, and we choose to believe in happy endings, always. Because when you find the right person, every day is a new chapter in a story you want to never end.